Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, June 3rd, 2026. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary. I have two announcements today. The first is I am officially unveiling the 2026 Commentary Roast, our annual dinner in New York City, on November 8th. This is, I believe, our 16th. And the roastee this year will be Ron Dermer. Ron Dermer, former ambassador to the United States, former chief aide to Bibi Netanyahu, great guy, fun to rib. You can go to commentary.org/roast for more information. That may be commentary.org/roast 2026. So if roast doesn't work, do roast 2026. And you can find out more information. And I'm also happy to report that our first ever subscription offer offered here on the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast has been going gangbusters. $19.95 for a year of commentary and commentary.org and our archives and the like. This is almost 80% off the ordinary ticket price, and we are very happy to offer it to first-time subscribers. So commentary.org/offer for the $19.95 a year. You guys have been lining up to do this in the last 2 days. Let's keep it going. It's really very heartening, not only for me, but for executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, our old pal, Poobah at the American Enterprise Institute, columnist with the Free Expression Vertical at the Wall Street Journal, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Okay, we have about 50 things to go through today, and none of them is good. So we'll choose our poison. How about we start with the American politics, because if we start with the war, we'll never get to anything else. So, primaries last night, very distressing result, at least in New Jersey, where a literal Al-Qaeda supporter named Adam Hamawy, a plastic surgeon, has won the Democratic primary in a 11-person field with 28% of the vote in his district. But this is a district that will go Democratic in November, and therefore a person who is a supporter of and an apologist for the blind sheikh, the man who was responsible for the first bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993 and was sentenced to life in prison in 1996. This guy's not just like has said some stuff online about his previous views on this matter. Literally an intimate of the blind sheikh. It will now be in Congress when Congress is sworn in, the next Congress in January of 2027. This is, I think, the most extreme result we've seen of the polarization period of American politics in the last 20, 25 years. I can't think of Al-Qaeda attacked the United States and killed 3,000 people and basically inaugurated the last 25 years of American foreign policy and strategy, and somebody who was on their side is going to be in Congress.
It's a really unusual race. And this, like you say, this is a deep blue district. It's kind of the middle of the state, the middle western part of the state of New Jersey. It's an open seat. The incumbent had been there for 12 years in Congress. And so they had this splintered field. And of all the multi-candidates, Hamawy was the one who was able to kind of transcend any communal basis in different townships or whatever, or different interest groups, and squeak out a win. I'd say if there's a silver lining, John, it's unlikely that his congressional career is going to last very long. I think the specific circumstances of this primary helped push him aside. But that in itself is meaningful about the current state of the Democratic Party and the left. I mean, you have a man with a Nazi tattoo about to win the Senate nomination in Maine, and now you have a sympathizer to Al-Qaeda, someone who went overseas to volunteer for a Al-Qaeda-linked charity that was reported recently, as well as his association with the Blind Sheikh, the mastermind, or one of the spiritual leader, you might say, of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. He's headed to Congress, and to just show how so unusual it is, next door. So Hamawy wins in New Jersey 12. Next door, just north, is New Jersey 7. Now, New Jersey 7 is also an interesting district. It's being represented by Representative Tom Keene, who no one has seen in months. And I don't know if we're going to get a message or, like remember when Mark Sanford went missing and his staff put out that he was hiking the Appalachian Trail, and it turned out he was kind of in the midst of an affair. I don't think that's the case with Congressman Keene. It seems he has some sort of undisclosed medical issue, but he's been absent for months. He's going to face, after last night's Democratic primary, a woman named Rebecca Bennett, who is a former Navy pilot and who's very pro-Israel and has stated repeatedly that Israel has a right to defend itself and that we should continue to support Israel. So it just shows you kind of the schizophrenic nature of American politics today, that in one community you have them literally nominating an Al-Qaeda sympathizer and travel 10 minutes and you have a pro-Israel Democrat going up against a missing congressman. So that's New Jersey. And yes, I agree. It's not good. It's not good for the state of the Democrats. But I don't know whether we should, say that this means, we're headed toward terrorists, dominating the U.S. Congress.
It's true that we contain multitudes. Those of us from New Jersey.
And, Seth, you're the authority on the Garden State.
Look, I mean, it's true, and also, I weirdly enough, I actually was born and raised in a red district in New Jersey. So things can get weird there. But it's all. I think my main concern with Hamawy and people like that and races like that is the question of whether it helps them to be seen as extreme in the primary, more or less. New Jersey has been trending away from far leftness in recent years in national campaigns. It's been surprisingly close. There have been rather shocking electoral upsets on the state level here and there. Power brokers are finding themselves, no longer being at the top of the food chain in New Jersey, union guys. So things have been changing for what one could say is the better, but at least toward a more mixed politics in New Jersey, and to the point where you could imagine it getting even closer in a presidential election. But on the state level, Republicans, still not going to win one of the Senate seats, and the districts are, pretty well carved out so that Republicans have, a few of their own red districts, and basically not, kind of cantons in a way. But so the real problem is that not that structurally things are going to change on the ground in New Jersey too much because they're set in that way on a state level. It's more like, does Adam Hamawy gain votes by being seen as a guy who volunteered for Al-Qaeda? And you're muted, John. John.
You're muted, John. We can't hear you yelling at us.
I was going to say, let's pull away from New Jersey and go national here. We have a primary in Michigan in 2 months, 2 months from tomorrow, August 4th. Right now, the most extreme candidate in that race is ahead by 5 points. Abdul El-Sayed, who seems to be in the 30s, while his two rivals, Haley Stevens and Mallory McMorrow, are in the 20s. So it's 2 months. It's a long time. We don't know what's going to happen there. But Abdul El-Sayed, a doctor, was a public health official, is the most extreme progressive in the race. virulently anti-Zionist, and the question you raise, which is that a feature or a bug? The answer is obviously that it's a feature, and that, as we can see in that case, maybe in the Plattner case, because obviously you there in Maine had an election between the most conventional Democratic politician you could possibly have chosen to run in that race, the sitting governor of the state, recruited because she was viewed as the most likely person to be able to knock off the sitting Republican senator, is swept away by this very odd guy who was already an odd guy before we found out about the Nazi tattoo and other stuff. Already had a very checkered and bizarre and peculiar resume. Already was somebody who was being endorsed by the most left factions of the Democratic coalition because of his extremism. So there seems to be no question the Democratic Party is undergoing its version of MAGAism, in the sense that just as in 2022, it seemed to be the case, in part because of Trump's interference, that the craziest candidates in the Republican Party kept getting nominations for things that a more conventional candidate would have walked into winning. The Democrats are now...
Chris Rabb, you could add Chris Rabb in Pennsylvania's 3rd district 2 weeks ago to that also.
Right. Exactly.
And Annalila Mejia, also in New Jersey.
Right.
Right.
But
another Bernie Sanders supporting anti-Israel freak.
Right.
But we're talking about candidates here in Hamawy and Said. There is no moderate tack available to them, really. I mean, we saw this.
You mean against them? You mean against them?
No. Where can they go and still be who they are? What in a who can they? How can they move to the center? What would that look like? I mean, they've already settled on what they're claiming is a kind of moderation that's being blown into extremism by the right. I mean, we saw this with Mamdani. He never changed. He never, and I consider him the exemplar of all this. He never stopped saying the things he said, but the media came around him and sort of threw him all these softballs and said, Stephen Colbert said, you believe in Israel's right to exist as a state, right? And he goes, yeah, leaving out the Jewish part. So they don't have to change anything, and I don't think they can. I don't think they can. There is no question that the extremism is a feature.
So if it's a feature, this is the question that's going to be answered by what happens in Michigan in the next 2 months. How explicitly do McMorrow and Stevens come out and say, we can really lose this seat to Mike Rogers, who will be the Republican nominee almost certainly for the Michigan seat. We can lose the seat because this guy is too extreme for Michigan, and we're not. They may be too scared to say that because extremism in the Democratic Party primary electorate will be a feature and not a bug. And they will
only McMorrow would be too afraid to say that. I think at some point if you're in that lane, if you're in the moderate lane, you will have to say that. But McMorrow is the one who's trying to straddle the two lanes.
I don't think I don't think they can say that in Michigan based on what happened at the Michigan Democratic Convention earlier this year. I mean, that party's clearly in the throes of a anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, anti-Trump left-wing hysteria. So I think they're really in a box in the Democratic Senate candidates. But I want to introduce a slightly different parallel to explain why I might be coming across as too sanguine over Hamawy. And I don't want to minimize how awful it is that he won this nomination. But when I look at him and how he won and the percentage he won and the fact that pro-Israel advocates did not actually get involved in this race. It reminds me a lot of Cori Bush. And Cori Bush, the former representative from Missouri, right? She gets elected in 2020, I believe. She joins the squad. She is anti-Israel. She's crazy socialist. It's all bent on anti-Trump hysteria and resistance in a deep blue district. And then what we have over the 4 years is she's just so bad a congressperson and not, doesn't even actually represent the district in a lot of ways, that eventually she's primaried and she moves out. And I think on the House level, you're going to see something similar because we know that
the same thing happened with Jamal Bowman.
Correct. Jamal Bowman's another one. So you see these candidates who are swept up in the anti-Trump movement, and then they're elected, they join the squad, they come from the district. Now, Bowman came from a slightly more purplish district. I mean, not even as deep blue as this. And we should remember the person that Hamawy's going to replace, she was terrible on Israel too. She was one of the few people to vote against aid to Israel during the war and in 2024, right? So you have a similar dynamic happening at the state level, and it's going to be damaging, but I think that the damage may be more short-term than long-term. The Senate, however, it could be very bad for the Democrats because it could cost them winnable seats in a cycle where they really, that if there's a moment to win the Senate, it would be this one. And then on the even higher level, the level of what the Democratic Party stands for, well, it's just atrocious because you go from terrorist sympathizers to people who are actually friends with terrorists. I mean that's awful for the Democratic Party, and they're struggling with it. You see the way that Graham Plattner was received by the Democratic senators on Capitol Hill yesterday. I mean, they all had to they were squirming, to try to say, oh, well, he's fine, we're going to win. And of course, Chuck Schumer, the shomer, Israel's noblest defender in the world, he backs the Nazi tattoo guy. But I
don't even have to talk about Israel. How about not talking about Israel with Plattner? How about just the fact that he has a Nazi tattoo and the highest ranking Jewish official in American history, and
sexting? We don't actually know the number of women that he sexted. It's anywhere from 6 to above a dozen, but we still don't know. And then plus all the Reddit comments that are endless of him just showing a complete.
I mean, in the past, the Chris Kyle stuff would have been disquifying, right? I mean, the cheering American military deaths would have been disqualifying not that long ago.
Yeah, just to explain, Chris Kyle was the subject of the movie American Sniper, the gigantic Clint Eastwood hit with Bradley Cooper, and author of this memoir, American Sniper, and he was murdered in 2013, and his murder was celebrated at the time by Graham Plattner, who said that he had served with him and that he deserved to die.
It's psychotic.
Yeah,
there's something wrong with Graham Plattner.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
deeply wrong. Before there are some other races that happened yesterday that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
We should talk about California, of course, but I also want to talk about Iowa briefly because I think it gets into the overall problem facing the Democratic Party. There's no question that Donald Trump is unpopular. There's no question that this is shaping up to be a bad year for Republicans. However, there's sometimes my family used to have the expression, many families do, your eyes are bigger than your stomach, right? And I think Iowa is maybe an example, just like Texas when we talked about the Texas primary last week. Another example of the Democrats' eyes getting too big for their stomach. And this is why. So Democrats, including Schumer, are very happy. They actually got the Senate candidate they want. He's a state representative named Josh Turek, I believe, and he was supported by Schumer as well as Pete Buttigieg, likely 2028 Democratic candidate. He defeated State Senator Zach Walz for the Democratic Senate nomination, and Walz was supported by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So that's an example of the establishment actually getting the candidate of their choice. And Turek is going to face Ashley Hinson, a U.S. Congresswoman, very popular in the general election. In the governor's race, something very interesting happened, which is that Trump's endorsed candidate lost. a very close election. Randy Feenstra, this a congressman who was endorsed very late in the race by Trump, he lost to a man named Zach Lawn or Khan. My handwriting is very bad.
Lawn, I think.
Lawn, yeah. And this Lawn is fascinating because he's a Maha person. He's a Maha activist, no experience. They're going to go up against another a Democratic candidate that the Democrats are excited about in the governor's race. However, here's the thing. I looked up 2004 Iowa vote. Okay, Bush won Iowa barely. He won it by about 10,000 votes in 2004. In 2024, Donald Trump won Iowa by 200,000 votes. The state is a plus 13 Republican state. So in order for these candidates to benefit, especially the Senate candidate in a federal, the governor races sometimes go differently than the national trend because of the state dynamic. But in particular, the Senate race and these congressional races that are also being contested, you're talking a tsunami. A huge 15-point swing in the vote for Democrats. And when you consider the current state of the brand, I'm slightly skeptical. So that's Iowa.
And importantly, as you noted, as we talked about before the show, the Cook Political Report, which is a very expensive newsletter that purports to be the insider's insider smart guy look at how everything works in politics, moved because of the victory of these two guys, has moved Iowa from likely Republican to lean Republican. That is these are the likely Republican, lean Republican, toss up, lean Democrat, likely Democrat. Those are their 5 categories. It's still that state that Matt described. It's still an R plus 13 state. They're only when they do something like this, it's because they want there to be a race, because they're emotionally, though the people at Cook want this to be true. And then Plato's Cave starts taking shape, and they're going to raise all this money and waste Democratic money chasing eyes bigger than your stomach, chasing a result in Iowa that is almost impossible to achieve, rather than spending that money judiciously elsewhere.
Well,
so the media encourages this. Happened in South Carolina. Oh, yeah. Also, when was that? 4 years ago?
Well, and it's happened in Texas. This is now like the third time it's happened in Texas, because it happened with Beto O'Rourke in 2018. It happened with Wendy Davis in 2014 against Greg Abbott. I mean, look, the way that the Democrats win the Senate is they have to hold their seats. That means they can't afford to lose Michigan, which we were just talking about, and they can't lose Georgia. Georgia, Ossoff is the incumbent there, and incumbents always have an advantage. Okay, so they can't lose either of those seats, and then they have to win North Carolina, which they can win, Maine, which they could win, but with Plattner exploding in front of our eyes, it becomes more difficult by the hour. Then they have to win Ohio, which Trump won by
8.
He won by 11 points.
11, okay.
11 points. He won by 500,000 votes.
Vance won by 8, as I recall.
Yes, but Vance, right? But Vance is not
22.
But we have yet to get there. So they have to win Ohio. Then they have to win Alaska. Trump won Alaska by 14 points. And then those are the 4 states they have to win. And then they're thinking about, Iowa, or even Texas. Look, it's bad. The situation's bad for Republicans, but in the Senate, the Democrats have a very steep hill to climb.
I mean, there are examples of unexpected
Yeah.
wave results in the Senate. 2014 was one. Republicans won 9 seats in 2014. The biggest one of all was 1980. That was obviously a landslide presidential election for Reagan, who won by 10 points over Carter, but brought in 12 Republican senators. And by the time the night was over in 1980, there were 55 Republican senators and 45 Democratic senators, and something like that had never happened before. And then literally the next cycle for those seats in 1986, the Senate went Democratic again. So it was a sort of it was an irrational exuberance moment for Republicans.
Yeah,
it is theoretically possible that Democrats, if there is a wave, then you can see Texas and Iowa and Alaska and Maine just following the national revulsion with Trump and hatred of Republicans in this. But absent that,
well, and Schumer knows
you
it.
don't need to spend money almost.
Have you been following how there's now another candidate on the ballot or trying to get on the ballot in Alaska named Dan P. Sullivan?
Yeah. So
the incumbent Republican is Dan Sullivan, great senator from Alaska. And he's running against former Congresswoman Mary Peltola. And this is clearly a scheme to confuse the voters and siphon away votes from the actual senator from people who think, oh, okay, it's Dan Sullivan. So that you wouldn't be resorting to these kind of chicanery if you felt, oh yeah, the wave is rising. Look, it's tilting. But remember 2022, and I have to say, like, there are commentators who I quite like who are saying, oh, it's a total disaster, total disaster, total disaster. They said the same thing about Biden and the Democrats in 2022. And what happened? Well, yeah, I mean, didn't go well for Biden and the Democrats, but
it was
not as badly as people thought. Right, exactly. Yeah, so we still have a ways to go. But I do want to talk about Los Angeles and California as well. And I just want to start by saying that California is a failed state, because the fact that we don't know the winners in these primaries, and we won't know for weeks, is just it's embarrassing.
We might know who's the next president before we know who won yesterday's.
Well, you raise someone on X made the excellent point. Imagine if we actually did vote for president on the basis of the national popular vote. It meant if California's current election practices held in such a scenario, we wouldn't know the president until after January 3rd, when the new Congresses are sworn in, and possibly after January 20th, when the president is constitutionally supposed to becomes the president at noon on that day. So it's really sad. And the very fact that California, and this is Nate Silver, not a conservative, pointing this out as well. There's no country like this as bad. Right? There's no state.
We have other big states that count their votes just fine.
How about Florida and Texas? They get it done, right? Now, Florida had to be shamed into
Washington and Oregon,
right?
Are mail only,
mail in, and they get it done.
And they get it done. And mail only is really hard. Part of the problem here is you have this weird combination system of mail early, the jungle primary, multiple sort of counting locations, and there's the Secretary of State's office isn't big enough to deal with the mad ballot numbers. I mean, it's a state of 38 million people with an electorate, I think, of 29, theoretical electorate of like 29 million people. So counting it is harder than in other states just because of the sheer numbers. But look, in New York, I mean, Florida fixed its system, but like Florida, they know in an hour or something. Like basically,
Florida's system should be the model, because it's a state with either out of state residents, dual residents. It's a military state. Florida has all the combinations
Florida
that
had
can make
had
it
to
difficult
fix
to count the votes.
Right. Florida had to fix its system because the country nearly fell apart because of its bad system in 2000. And it sort of was, our backs are against a wall, and there was a gun to the head of the American democracy until Florida repaired itself. Florida, another interesting case of a state that, in 2000, right?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Right.
In the Bush era, right.
Split, and now it's like
Deep
I don't
red.
know,
I mean, this is the thing. Yeah. This gets back to your bubble point, the Plato's cave point. Yeah. Is the political winds have shifted against the Trump administration for good reason, but it's still the same country. There are deep red parts of this country, and that hasn't changed headed into the midterm either.
Right. So the map, it's always worth going back to look at the electoral map of the United States. You can do it at any moment. And what you see, there are 3,300 counties in the United States, and 2,700 of them are Republican. But they're the least populous of the counties. And there are 10 metropolitan areas and their environs that are deep blue, right? 10. And that's where 80% of the Democratic vote comes from. So structurally, Republicans have this advantage because of their geographical dominance. And Democrats, when you look at this, you say it's really hard. It's actually kind of amazing that Democrats do as well as they do in Senate races, that it's as competitive as it is at the Senate and the gubernatorial level. It shows that Americans aren't necessarily just naked partisans. The weird things can happen at any moment based on these responses. The other point we should make is that the generic ballot, so there's a polling called the generic ballot. That's just the question: would you vote for a Republican or a Democrat in your district for Congress in the upcoming election? And the most recent one, which is Emerson, which is the gold standard pollster at the moment, yesterday or this morning comes out with a poll that has the Democrats leading the generic ballot by 1 point. That's with oil at $5. That's with the war taking a pretty bad turn, which we'll talk about in a minute. That's with inflation rising and all of that. And still the Democrats' brand, as you say, is sufficiently damaged.
We should say, they are, what we talked about earlier, they're not running generic Democrat in several races. They're not even running the +1 version.
Right.
So just as we should say that as we record this on a Wednesday morning, June 3rd, currently the Republican candidate for California governor, Steve Hilton, is ahead in the count by 120,000 votes. Steve Hilton has 28% of the vote so far. He leads Xavier Becerra, the former Health and Human Service Secretary for Joe Biden. We all remember Xavier Becerra. Not. He's one of these machine politicians that just cycles through the Democratic machine. Anyway, he's in second place. He with 25% of the vote. And he's duking it out right now with Tom Steyer, the billionaire, who is actually under 20%, not even 1 million votes.
Yeah, so not a lot of duking there. I mean,
not a lot of duking.
It's
like a body slam.
Yeah, he spent $300 million.
Yeah, as often, as we remember from the Michael Bloomberg presidential candidacy in 2020, money does not equate votes. So that's
he won Guam. It was $1 billion for Guam.
He did win
American
Guam.
Samoa.
Yeah, and American Samoa.
American Samoa. Excuse me. That's right.
So
American Samoa.
Because of the electoral system in California, the top 2 vote finishers move on to the general election. Now I have to say, in fourth place right now with 11% of the vote and 566,000 votes is the other Republican candidate, Chad Bianco, a sheriff. There's a lot of pressure on him to drop out of the race in the final weeks ahead of the runoff and endorse Hilton. And if that had happened, I mean, that's, as of now, that's another 10% added to Hilton's vote. So However, there's only 58% of the votes counted. Yeah. So you don't know with the California electoral system, all of a sudden one of these unions that run the state say, oh, well, we have all these votes here for
look,
Becerra.
there's my trunk. The trunk of my car
Yeah,
has ballots in it.
2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
California is the state where they can find votes anywhere, but they can't find water.
And they can't find fraud either,
right.
by the way.
Yeah.
But, okay, so that's just, I wanted to memorialize
that's the gubernatorial level. And
that's the gubernatorial level. And then the real contest, a contest that I think has huge implications for the future of America, is the LA mayoral race, which as we speak here, 63% of the votes have been counted. So that's good on Los Angeles. They're doing a little bit better than the state. The incumbent, former Castro trainee, Karen Bass, she's ahead with 35% of the vote. And trailing her in second place is Spencer Pratt, the reality TV star who has really taken the world by storm with his viral ads and his common sense campaign against homelessness and crime, and also the lack of rebuilding after the Palisades fire. He trails her by about 20,000 votes. And then the third candidate that was receiving a lot of attention, Nathia Rahman, the socialist who is running, she's in third place now. She's 40,000 votes behind Pratt at 22%. So that's how things stand right now, meaning that we have the chance for actual choices for the voters at the gubernatorial and then the LA mayor's race in November, unless suddenly these votes just start coming in for either Rahman or Tom Steyer.
Yeah, I mean the one thing to be said is that if you did to sort of do the math, it's still almost impossible for either Hilton or Pratt to win, even if they make it into the runoff.
You mean a general election?
In a general election,
yeah.
So what we're talking about here more is the assertion, I think, for building purposes, that there is building up an anti-democratic vote in California from which you could start rebuilding the sort of self-destructed Republican Party.
Yeah, the way I would say it is, there's definitely an anti-Bass vote. There's an anti-incumbency vote in Los Angeles that if Pratt makes it to the runoff, makes it to the general, he has an opportunity. It's very hard because he's coded right? But he does have, I think, something of an opportunity. Hilton, there it's a little bit, there it's a change. It'd have to be changed, but both would be running up against an anti-Trump tide, and in a blue year, it's hard. But I'll just say this, and it's something that I've thought about actually since the Palisade fire happened. When Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans in 2005, all of the blame at the time went to George W. Bush and the Bush administration. And the whole media in the Democratic Party, everyone, this was Bush failed us. Remember Kanye West, of course, showing early signs of his mental problems, saying George W. Bush hates white people, black people rather. That was what was happening in 2005. Beginning in 2006, voters in Louisiana threw out New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin, and then threw out Democratic Governor Kathleen Blanco, and beginning to lay the groundwork for red turn in Louisiana with figures like Bobby Jindal, for example, who had been in the House and then he went statewide. So oftentimes you have this kind of reaction to a total government incompetence that expresses itself later on. And this is similar to the argument you make, John, about COVID, right? When governments can't or respond badly to these natural disasters, the effects show up in weird ways. And I think that is that's why we're talking about Steve Hilton and certainly talking about Spencer Pratt in ways that normally we would not be talking about the challengers to the Democratic establishment in California.
I think one of the hurdles here, though, in California is that when you have a state that's failing as comprehensively as it is, where the problems are so broad and dire, is that there are people, we've seen it, it's more urgent to leave the state than to stay behind and change the direction of the governance. So then you end up with the diehard.
The machines have no problem with the middle class fleeing to red America because it just solidifies its control.
It empowers them, exactly. But yes, we don't know what the net effect of these kinds of earth-shaking events are, and we do have one example in California history of a massive failure of governance leading to an unexpected Republican statewide victory, and that was both the recall of Governor Gray Davis in 2003 because of an energy crisis that led to rolling blackouts across the state for a year, and then, of course, the totally unexpected election of Arnold Schwarzenegger as governor, who served 2 terms. The state had already gone deep blue at this point, but Schwarzenegger was a reformist outsider candidate who said, none of these people can do this job.
Also, like Hilton, an immigrant.
Right, an immigrant with an accent. So Hilton has
the parallels are striking.
There's a parallel. I mean, again, that was an extraordinarily unusual, off-cycle election that had no national valence, and so it's a slightly different story. But nonetheless, you look to history; it's not impossible, but it is an uphill climb. And Pratt, I have to say, as you mentioned, Pratt is an exciting and unexpected candidate, and that could also mean that when the full ire of the Democratic and liberal machine is turned on him like a fire hose, that he won't be able to remain standing, or that could Teflon him, or it could jujitsu him into a higher standing because it'll look like they're beating up on him unfairly. And all he is a guy who had a house in the Pacific Palisades that was destroyed, and the city has made it impossible for him to build his house again. And then he's like, I got to run for office because these people have ruined my life, and they just the way they're ruining your lives. That's a very powerful
you have to be mayor of Los Angeles if you want to rebuild your house. That's the message.
Yeah. That is the message.
Run for mayor if you want to rebuild your house from the fire caused by the negligence. But also, one other thing to say about Spencer Pratt is that he's very good on TV. And that's no surprise, as he's a TV guy. That's comes in really handy in politics. When you ask him questions, he answers them well. Like he gives, he has a lot of. First of all, he has a lot of emotion in it. He does not, because he's a TV guy, he's not stiff as a board. And so you ask him questions, he gets real animated, and you can see it, feels like he's a passionate guy and all that stuff. But also his answers contain detail. He talks to experts. His answers contain detail. He says, my opponent wants to do this, but look what happens when you do this. You get this. See, in other words, he talks like a very like a passionate wonk almost, and I think he will work well in his favor when they say like, "Oh, what does this reality TV star know?" And he's happy to tell you what he knows.
No, I mean, look, the whole point is if he can break the institutional advantage of incumbency and the mayoralty and the partisan advantage in Los Angeles, if he can somehow elude them, break them, or use them to his advantage, he can find a very narrow lane to win. But that's not, if you were going on Kalshi, I'm not sure that's a bet that you would necessarily want to make. Okay, look, we've been going here for 45 minutes, and we have avoided the fact that America is in very dire shape outside of last night's election.
Don't you think that's indicative of where the country is on the war, though?
How so?
I think people would much rather be talking about domestic politics than hearing what's happening in the Middle East.
Well,
because the truth is nothing is happening in the Middle East except we're fighting Iran. They're fighting us.
Oh, I don't agree. I think Iran
You
is
don't
fighting
agree?
us, and we're not fighting Iran. I think what
We
happened
blew
yesterday.
up targets last night on Keshem Island, and we disabled a tanker that
Yeah.
was trying to run the blockade.
Yeah, and they blew up the Kuwait airport, and they're firing ballistic missiles whose location we know, and we are not hitting their re-exposed ballistic missile batteries, because according to us, we are still in ceasefire, while they are firing on Kuwait and the UAE, and might start firing on Saudi Arabia. They're not firing on Israel because they're too scared to fire on Israel. But
But Hezbollah's firing on Israel.
okay, so and Trump, for reasons that are completely elusive, has decided to take the Iranian position that it believes that a ceasefire in Lebanon is part of the ceasefire between the United States and Iran, and therefore Israel defending itself against Hezbollah rockets and attacks and going aggressively to destroy Hezbollah's capabilities. Trump has now effectively taken Iran's side in saying that Israel has to pull back and not do anything and not go into Beirut, and Bibi is effing crazy, as he has now acknowledged. That he said to Lydia Moynihan of the New York Post that Bibi was being too mean to Lebanon. This is not the American position. The American position is that Lebanon has been partially occupied by a terrorist group under Iran's sway that is destroying Lebanon's sovereignty. Something, by the way, that the prime minister of Lebanon implicitly agrees with, even though Hezbollah is partially in his government. And Trump is framing his argument that Israel should not be, aggressively prosecuting this war against Hezbollah on the grounds that he's being mean to Lebanon, where arguably Israel is trying to save Lebanon from Hezbollah. So Trump has lost the plot. And
Trump has also been more aggressive toward this is not the American position. It's not Trump's position. Trump has been more aggressive over the past 2 years toward Hezbollah, arguably, than Bibi Netanyahu has. We've had numerous times where Trump is like, just do what needs to be done. This thing can't become, I can't have this frozen conflict constantly, messing up my negotiations elsewhere. Just finish it. And he's been more aggressive in that sense. And also in the ceasefire terms, remember, decades ago last month, in the ceasefire terms that he last approved, were basically suggested that Lebanon is not a state until it proves otherwise. He basically was like, look, Israel can go in. It doesn't have to leave any territory in Lebanon. And what territory it will leave will have been proven to be Hezbollah free, made so by the Lebanese armed forces. In other words, you can have sovereignty over every place that you extend sovereignty over, prove it. And now it's sort of like, well, we don't want to violate Lebanon's sovereignty, when the very idea was a joke to him, I don't know, 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago.
Right. So what do we learn? What have we learned, Dorothy? What have we learned is that Trump's word means nothing, and Trump's word changes from day to day and week to week, and he is calling something a ceasefire that is not a ceasefire, and he is referring even by the way, Matt, you say, we struck targets in Iran, we disabled a tanker, all of that. He is still clinging to the idea that there is a ceasefire.
So
go ahead.
Well, it's very reminiscent of late 2019, where the Iranian militias in Iraq were firing on our bases there, and we were we were defending our bases. But Trump was saying, "Well, no, I'm not going to. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We have maximum pressure against Iran." Then finally, he said something like, "Well, if they kill an American, there's going to be problem." They killed an American contractor. Then they were injuring Americans. Then they killed an American soldier, I believe. And what happens? He destroys Qasem Soleimani. I think we're in a very similar situation right now. Right now, Trump's priority is to get this deal. He wants the deal to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Now, of course, the ceasefire, which we've been stuck in for over 2 months, was premised on Iran opening up the Strait of Hormuz, which they have not done. And now we have more indications that Iran has been laying mines throughout this process. But that's what he wants. He wants to get some sort of deal, but he's totally content with the status quo. Right? He's totally content with the status quo. The problem is he's talking to people who have do not control the people with the guns. You can see I think one way to read what's happening over the past 48 hours with these escalating Iranian attacks on the Gulf states and on us is the IRGC is trying to torpedo the diplomatic process and to show, look, we're the guys in charge now. And why Trump doesn't understand that and actually deal with the people who are running Iran, which is the IRGC, which is not the Nepo baby Ayatollah, not the president who, according to Iran International, submitted his resignation, right? But the actual IRGC commanders, Vahidi and company, that to me is the real mystery. Though I think eventually he's gonna lash out.
I would have thought he would have lashed out before. He is sending every Abe. You've been pretty quiet here. I think you and I probably agree on what I'm going to say. So you say it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the hard thing is I've sort of run out of things to say about this because it's the same thing I would have said 2-3 weeks ago, which is he has to resume kinetic fighting at some point here. There's no deal available except a terrible fake deal. If that's where we end up, it will be a historic tragedy and a disaster for his presidency and for the country. The war was very successful. The ceasefire has been almost ruinous. That has not changed since the ceasefire began. Everyone can see it, seemingly except the president. So I don't understand what the last straw would be for him. He's also, as we discussed with Jonathan Schanzer, possibly constrained by a munitions shortage on our side. So he's gotten himself into, everyone always said Trump is in a box, Trump is in a box, Trump is in a box. He's now put himself in a box.
But see, I think he's fine with the box.
I know.
Why? Because there is no deal. There is no deal. And then he said last week, remember, he said, it's a final determination. And then there was no determination, and it looks like they sent back, tougher language to whoever they're talking with. In the meantime, the blockade is going on. We are having this low wage conflict when the IRGC lashes out. And the bet, I think, with Iran that he's making is the economic situation is going to continue to decline. And so the real issue here is his constraint of Israel. That's what I take issue with. That is wrong. Because if anything, Israeli action against Hezbollah would give America additional leverage. And why he's denying that is is a mystery, and other than just his kind of habitual want to play nice to bad guys.
It's disturbing though because it indicates that his preference is not to let a U.S. blockade destroy the Iranian economy. It's to get a deal.
But okay, so Schanzer has said, and I believe that it is conceivable that the best long-term strategy for actual victory here is what Matt is laying out. That is to say, we blockade the Strait of Hormuz. We choke them economically until they basically are strangled to death. That's a long-term strategy. That's 6, 8, 10 months of naval blockading and interdiction and sanctioning officials and maybe assassinating some people in order to send the message and all of that. Meanwhile, what he seems to be worried about is oil prices, right? West Texas Intermediate. And I think he's very proud of the fact that oil is in the 90s when Biden, in 2022, after the Ukraine war, oil got to $122 a barrel. So he's oil prices.
You said $5 gas, but the truth is gas prices nationwide have fallen by some 30 cents since they peaked at $4.50 a gallon in mid-May.
Right.
So yes, the status quo is meant to manage the economics while continuing to apply the pressure on the regime.
So do you think, honestly, that Trump has a strategy, or is he just Fran Tarkenton running around in the backfield?
I think he doesn't. He does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
Right.
And so what we found is he got himself into this position, as he always does, where because of the munitions, because of the economic conditions where oil was rising and where the yield was rising and where there was economic disturbance, the gas prices were rising, and because of the Gulf monarchs saying to him that if he took the next step on the escalation ladder, then Iran would target the Gulf desalinization and electrical generation plants, and they don't believe they have the air defenses necessary to defend them. He imposed the ceasefire. But he's having the ceasefire without conceding on the nuclear program.
Yet.
But it's amazing that he has. And what did he say the other day? We might hear back from them in a week. That's another week. And I'm not seeing the time for us to rip our hair out on Iran, not on what he's doing to Israel, because I totally agree with your critique of what he's doing in Israel. But the time to rip our hair out on Iran is if he signs an MOU that ends the blockade and provides some upfront financial benefit to Iran in exchange for meaningless nuclear promises. And we're not there.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're so calm. I'm delighted to have a calming voice because before we started this podcast, I told Noam Bloom, our producer, that I wanted to have a special shot in the YouTube video, just like sitting there, of a cyanide pill right next to me that I might take if the conversation went, too far in the wrong direction, or maybe like that little cup that the guy drank.
The International Criminal Court.
I just think that you have to be calm during the Trump era, because it constantly looks like everything's falling apart when actually.
Very quickly, let's talk about that. So let's just go into. He's had a pretty bad couple of weeks domestically in terms of his own the sort of the grandiosity of the second Trump term, right? The fund, the weaponization payout fund has been killed, basically, pretty much by the Senate. But Trump has agreed to withdraw the demand for the $1.8 billion weaponization fund. He has surrendered control of the Kennedy Center, and
I love that language. It's like the way you put it. It's like he's been holed up there for months.
Yeah, exactly. A
couple of
other things, but of course, then you have yesterday another one of these head shaking moments of him, serving his team. In appointing a lunatic named Bill Pulte as the acting director of national intelligence, an official, housing official in the Trump administration, notable for having the fantastic idea of pursuing a Fed governor on mortgage, criminally on the fact that she had lied on her taxes about her mortgage. Then it turned out that his dad, who was a very rich real estate guy, had done exactly the same thing. But he's clearly a sop. I don't know to whom. To Roger Stone. I don't even know to whom.
I think I think it's less. I think it's less a favor than it is a middle finger to the people who have been giving him all this guff as he's complaining. You can see on the Truth Social, he's annoyed that people are, got the yips, as he says, or what he said recently, all the people chipping away, at these various things. And so again, he lashes out by doing something like this. And for everyone in our audience who is angry at me for being copacetic about, and I'm not copacetic, I would rather he force the strait open, as we can do with all the risks entailed. But if you're angry at me for being copacetic about the situation in Iran, allow me to say that this is one of the worst decisions Donald Trump has made in his second term, not appointing, again, not even nominating, because he knows that there's no way that the Senate would ever confirm Bill Pulte to be the Director of National Intelligence. So he has appointed Bill Pulte to be the acting Director of National Intelligence. And in this capacity, Pulte can serve as acting director for 210 days until January of 2027. That said, I don't think he's going to last that long for a couple of reasons. One is what you just laid out, John. As the head of the FHFA, Federal Housing Finance Authority or Administration, which oversees Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, Pulte has led the lawfare, one wing of the lawfare campaign against Trump's enemies. So he's used these mortgage tactics against Letitia James, Adam Schiff, Lisa Cook, the aforementioned Fed governor, and Congressman Eric Swalwell. And stirring up controversy. All the cases are tied up in litigation. It's clear retribution and criminalization of politics. So that's one reason. That alone. But then there's the fact that according to statute, 2004 statute establishing the Director of National Intelligence, which is it's a White House office that basically is meant to coordinate and oversee the 18 different spy agencies in our government. The statute that created this position in the aftermath of 9/11 explicitly requires the director to have extensive, not just experience, extensive national security experience. And it's unclear whether Pulte has ever had a security clearance or could get one. He is a housing, he's a real estate businessman. He majored in broadcast communications. He's a diehard Trump supporter and loyalist. And that there are you'd think the Senate was angry about the weaponization fund. They are simmering over this appointment. And now there's a threat from the Democrats that if Pulte remains in this acting position, the Democrats will withhold their votes to reauthorize the critical FISA surveillance program. And I think there's going to be similar blowback on Capitol Hill as there was to the weaponization fund.
Okay, I think we should leave it there. This was a much less despairing podcast episode than I
That's
expected.
because I'm here.
You're here, just
I'm here for you.
sprinkling joy and
That's people who know me will say. That's what I do wherever I go.
Copacetication, if that's a word that I can incept. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks, Matt, for Abe and Seth. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.